Cleo from 5 to 7 is fucking genius. This 1962 French film sits pretty at a 96% on Rotten Tomatoes. And the other 4% can go to hell! So yeah, the filmmakers in post-war France had no means to make films. Broke as shit. And no resources either. So what'd they do? They studied film. They wrote about film. They talked about film over cafe and cigarettes. They woke up thinking about films. They went to bed thinking about films. They f***ed to films. They took shits thinking about films. And these people knew films. I'll tell you what, they criticized French movies for lack of innovation. The movies felt stale. Bleh. How you say, meh. So instead, they decide to take matters in their own hands. They rounded up cheap cameras, abandoned the need for a studio set, trained actors, a budget, just the things you needed to make a movie. They made movies in their own new and original format. And by doing so, changed the face of cinema for years and years and years. They showed everywhere possible the alternatives for production. They avoided old techniques, not just to be different, but to also just show how things could be done differently. They wrangled up all the rules, shoved them in a potato sack, and beat them senseless with the goddamn baguette. You don't need elaborate sets and expensive equipment and Meryl Streep to make great films. You just need a vision. You don't have to work at the bottom your whole career to become someone who makes respected art. We called this wave of filmmakers La Nouvelle Vague, French New Wave. French New Wave films were shot on location in the grime of the streets, indie as indie could be. So yeah, they wrote that cinema was in the process of becoming a new means of expression on the same level as painting and the novel, a form in which and by which an artist can express his thoughts, however abstract they may be, or translate his obsessions exactly as he does in the contemporary novel. They called this new age the age of the camera stylo. The camera was their quill pen. And these people didn't fuck around. If you don't have anything new to say, what's the point in saying anything? No, a couple 2-3 guys had a production collective. They was called the Young Turks. No, not these guys. F those guys. Those name-thieving, publicity-sucking motherfuckers. Nah, not them. Jean-Luc Godard, Francois Truffaut, Eric Romer. Never heard of them? Well, you did now. And don't you forget it. They thought that film should come from a singular mind's vision. That person should have complete creative control of cinematography, editing, dialogue, etc., so on and so forth, yada yada yada. They saw this person as the author of the film, the auteur. You might hear people say auteur, but f those people. I'm gonna say auteur, because I like it. Here's a quote. A true auteur is someone who brings something genuinely personal to his subject, instead of producing a tasteful, accurate, but lifeless rendering of the original work. A film should be a dialogue with the audience. French New Wave movies basically invented breaking the fourth wall for this very reason, to literally talk directly with the audience. These guys f***ing loved Alfred Hitchcock and Orson Welles. I mean, who doesn't? Probably the same 4% who rated this movie bad on Rotten Tomatoes. But why did these two American auteurs in particular speak to these French film junkies? Well, Alfred Hitchcock's films weren't Paramount Pictures flicks. They were Hitchcock flicks. And they weren't stale. They were innovative as f***. The auteur could have his own styling and visual trademarks throughout their works. The New Wave homies wanted to make art that captured life in France in the 50s and 60s, and shake it up in the process. And they sure as did. Truffaut trashed film festivals so harshly that he was banned from the Cannes Film Festival. Then, he came back the year afterwards with his new movie, The 400 Blows, and won Best Director. Suck on that, Meryl Streep! Yeah, we'll get to that in another video, though. Anyway, these filmmakers were so film literate that they knew just what to show. No more, no less. You didn't need to show the audience everything. I mean, audiences were smart enough to put the pieces together. They didn't use any elaborate establishing shots like this, and this. And instead of cutting back and forth to move around in a scene, the camera would pan over to whatever was next. Like this. And this. And oh yeah, this! By removing the pieces of film that weren't necessary, the pace sped up. Like YouTube. French New Wave was basically Casey Neistat in the 1950s Paris. Now to these auteurs, back and forth static camera cuts were boring as Instead, Truffaut panned and moved quickly. Godard tracked from a low angle in front. Varda tracked slowly through settings, like a point of view, kinda like a first-person video game. Tension wasn't shown through editing, rather, it was shown via camera motion. It's an in-your-face technique, still to this day, but they didn't want to immerse you in a realistic sense, but rather make you aware that you were watching a movie. For example, this gal flips a pancake, answers the goddamn phone, then comes back a half minute later to catch the pancake. Playful. Anyway, enough yapping about the context. We'll look more at the details of this movement in a later video, promise. Anyway, who's does it? This film is by Agnes Varda. Agnes started as a photographer, and it shows. People call her the mother and grandmother of French New Wave. Whatever the f that means. I thought that sort of thing only went on in West Virginia. This film captures a story about fear, or any strong emotion, changing an attitude or way of viewing life. On the longest day of the year, June 21st, we watch as a famous singer, Cleo, has 2 hours to wait for the test results of a biopsy. She may have terminal stomach cancer. She is forced to confront not only the possibility of death, but the reality of her life, the fear of dying for a bad cause. Now listen to what Varda says about living in Paris.
If I shoot in Paris, what is dominating my feelings about Paris? It's fear. I came from a country in a way, country city, and I'm not a Parisian, and I felt that it's a city to be afraid of loneliness, afraid of so many people, and so fear.
The film opens up in color with a tarot card reading. Cleo picks a death card, then asks for her palm to be read. The psychic reads her palm, then abruptly stands up and says, "I don't read palms," even though she just was. When Cleo leaves sobbing, the psychic tells her husband, "I saw straight death in that bitch's palm, dude." And as the next hour and 15 minutes pass, before she receives her test results, each minute that passes in the film is a minute that passes for the viewer. We feel, in real time with the character, the pace at which waiting occurs. It's genius! Cleo's bandmates, lover, caretaker, all fail to give her emotional support, although she never really tells them about her crisis. She goes on a solo gallivant through Paris, wearing all black, a sort of living existential funeral for herself. She has social anxiety, always preoccupied with how others are viewing her. We get these POV shots of pedestrians looking at the camera like it's some sort of public spectacle, which it was. These was random ass pedestrians that were walking past and were like, "The f***? A camera? The f***?" We get to decide whether these strange looks are supposed to be legitimately what it is like to walk around the streets when you're that dolled up and famous, or if it's more of a portrayal of how Cleo is imagining others looking at her. Deep Didn't know there'd be trigger warnings.
I need my safe space.
Cleo goes to meet a naked friend who shows her how to experience outwardly, instead of obsessing over viewership, which we'll get to later because it's the key to this whole f***ing movie. She eventually meets a soldier, Antoine, who is having a similar existential crisis of possible imminent mortality. He's leaving the next day for the Algerian War. His similar yet opposite mortal troubles put hers into perspective. They quickly form a bond of understanding. They see each other as humans and outwardly experience together. They don't view each other as spectacles of their worlds, but rather partners to view it with. Antoine helps Cleo come to terms with herself as he escorts her to the doctor. She finds peace before the test results even come back. Thanks, Antoine. You're a real pal. What a shame. You had to go die in that war, didn't you? So does she have cancer? Hold your f***ing horses, Chief. I'm not done yet. The film is 90 minutes long. According to Varda herself, for the first 45 minutes, Cleo is looked at, passive. She's only described by the way people look at her, including us viewers. Exactly at the halfway point, 45 minutes in, Cleo begins to be the one who looks at things. And from that time forward, she looks at the people in the street, the one who's swallowing frogs in public. She looks at shops, and she looks at herself with the ridiculous hat. She throws a ridiculous hat away, and she looks at her friend Dorothy, being exposed naked as a model, and she could see that the artists look through the body of the woman, to look at her as something that they need to make a design, to make a piece of art with. It was an allegory of the day woman started to look for herself, to other people, to other things, to landscape, to street, instead of focusing on how they look for others. Varda also states that if she met that soldier the day before, she wouldn't have spoken to him, but because of the change that meeting her friend causes, she does speak to him.
It's about time. It's also about some time in the time that are so precious that suddenly something happens that makes that time more interesting than before and after. But subjective time is what we all feel, you know. When you wait something, it's very long. If you're speaking with friends, the same 5 minutes go by in a minute. And I wanted to feel the time doing like this, suddenly expanding and being suddenly narrow, expanding. Two lonely experiences that can be together for that specific short time.
Cleo is a rare example of a woman reaching the so-called constructed standard of visual attraction. Her looks should be one less thing to worry about, or so another human would think. However, she is therefore consumed even further by her appearance. So much so that she's defined by it. She's still obsessed with her look and people noticing her even when trying to cope with death. It's an accidental, existential crisis. Trying to get me a bumper sticker that says that, huh? So when she goes to visit her friend Dorothy, we're first introduced to her butt naked, posing for sculptors to make artifacts of her physical shape. But the feeling in the room and the looks Dorothy receives aren't debasing and itemizing. Instead, calm, contemplative, and worshipping nature as beautiful. If the people in the streets looked at Cleo like a busker or public attraction, the artists look at Dorothy like a sunset. Dorothy is being sculpted by both men and women. Each iteration of her is different and complex. The artists don't boil her down into an item, but just the opposite. They take her bareness and portray various extensions of complexity. Dorothy is at ease and unashamed on how people view her. Unlike Cleo, she's not defined, and therefore entrapped by her looks. She has no costume, literally, and therefore has no facade to barrier her from showing flaws to others. For this very reason, Dorothy is happy and in the moment. Cleo's just f***ing taking notes over here, like, she really needed this. Spending this time with Dory allows Cleo to catch a glimpse of what freedom of outward experience feels like. Cleo is constantly performing someone else's idea of the ideal woman and compromising herself as a result. But as she's visiting Dorothy, she accidentally breaks her compact mirror. Cleo, of course, feels that this is an omen for death. And Dorothy's like, yeah, you tripping. The broken mirror is actually a hopeful image, a signifier of the shattering of Cleo's compromised identity. But more on this later. So Cleo eventually goes to the park alone and interacts with a stranger, one who is being shipped off to fight a morally dubious Algerian war and facing his own mortality. Now, just as Cleo represents the female experience of pursuing someone else's idea of what a woman should be, Antoine represents the male experience of performing someone else's idea of duty, expending your own experience to serve the state that provided you with your life in the first place. Now, the two share very similar but very opposite existential crises. They form a quick sense of trust and understanding. Antoine is the impetus that makes Cleo act on her anxiety and catches a train with her to go see the doctor for the results. And through their conversations, we find that Cleo's name is actually not Cleo at all. It's Florence. It's f***ing Florence. Cleo represents the performance of Florence through her whole life. Never turned off, always performing, even in the most personal human events as mortality. Throughout her life, Cleo was a character, an object, a spectacle, her own idealized version of what she thought a woman should be, which is why they chose the name Cleo, cause, well, even as she says in the movie, Cleopatra, come on, I'm laying the pieces in front of you, come on, you gotta pick them up, come on. But yeah, she's been a spectacle her whole life, never a person. But here, her and Antoine are able to meet each other's view on equal footing. Normally for Cleo, there is a viewer, and there is her, the object. But with Antoine, there's no such power disparity. The final shot of them walking shows them both equally, side by side, looking ahead, experiencing outwardly. They then simultaneously turn to look at each other equally, almost as a mirror. They don't see each other as objects in the world to look at, but rather sharers of the same outward experience, acknowledging each other's humanity, their viewership. That's what life is, I guess, huh? Seeing a bunch of shit, and then you die. So, anyway, Cleo is left happy, even when she hears that, drumroll please, she has cancer. Now, she needs a couple to 3 months radiation, but the doctor says she should be fine, but we don't know if she dies or not. But Varda kinda insinuates that she's probably gonna die. But the point is, it doesn't matter. Who the f cares about tomorrow? Am I right? If you're not living today correctly, then what's tomorrow worth? Boom. Splat. That's my brain and my heart on the f***ing ground. I gotta pick those up, don't I? Yeah, but real quick, before I pass out, I'm losing a lot of blood here. My favorite part of this movie is the use of mirrors. Mirrors are f***ing everywhere. For the first half of the movie, when she's being viewed, she checks herself out, fixes her hair, tries on hats, and ends up ripping off her wig and hanging it up on a mirror. Everyone, including her, is constantly viewing her. And because of this, she never looks inside. Self-obsession, narcissism, matzelagok. Then when she visits Dorothy, she breaks that pocket clutch mirror I was talking about and claims it's a bad omen of death. But on their drive back, they see an accident where a man died. Dorothy claims that the omen was meant for him. But then we see another broken mirror from the accident with a fractured and puzzled Cleo looking into it. So what's this omen for then? What else is about to die? Maybe something inside of Cleo. Hint, hint, hint. From that point on, for the second half, mirrors follow her on her walk through Paris, but are now broken or distorted, representing both the rejection of her personality based on itemizing looks as well as the fractured concept of who she is. In the park, we see one last mirror. After this, there is not one single mirror shown. Trust me, I checked. Cleo has changed her mindset, but has yet to bump into Antoine, her impetus for actionable change. Now, right before Antoine walks over, Cleo stands on this tiny island-like stepstone. She looks down into the water and sees her natural, distorted reflection. As she stares back at herself, she is just as afraid of dying as she is of living. Okay, I'm definitely gonna need an EMT soon to defibrillate me as I'm, Let's go watch this car scene where Cleo outwardly views the city around her. The exact route in Paris between the locations is the same one they take, and they show the whole thing in real time. Fucking genius! Okay, bye.